I still remember the exact sound the key made when I slid it into the front door lock that Tuesday night. It was a sharp, metallic click that echoed through the quiet suburban cul-de-sac of our neighborhood, a sound that usually meant comfort, safety, and the end of a grueling 72-hour shift. I was a regional manager for a logistics firm, and my life for the past 5 years had been a blur of airport lounges, red-eye flights, and espresso shots. But every single time I turned that key, the exhaustion would just melt away because I knew what was waiting for me on the other side. My wife, Chloe, and our beautiful, quiet life in our 3-bedroom colonial house in Austin. We had built something real there. We had the perfect lawn, the wraparound porch, and a marriage that our friends constantly used as a blueprint for their own relationships. Or so I thought. That night was supposed to be a surprise. My final meeting in Dallas had been canceled at the last minute, allowing me to catch an earlier flight home instead of spending another miserable night in a sterile Hilton room. I hadn't called Chloe because I wanted to see the look of pure excitement on her face when I walked through the door at midnight instead of noon the next day. I even had a bouquet of those locally sourced deep red roses she loved sitting on the passenger seat of my truck. Walking up the driveway, I remember looking at the soft amber glow coming from our living room window. It felt so incredibly welcoming. When I pushed the door open, the house was unusually still, but the air felt heavy with a scent that didn't belong. It wasn't the lavender candles Chloe usually burned, nor was it the comforting smell of home-cooked food. It was the sharp, distinct aroma of expensive bourbon and a faint trace of cologne. Not my cologne. That was the first tiny fracture in the reality I had constructed for myself. But my mind, tired and desperate for normalcy, instantly rationalized it. Marcus. Of course it was Marcus. Marcus had been my best friend since our freshman year at Ohio State. We had shared cramped dorm rooms, survived terrible breakups, and stood as best men at each other's weddings. But 3 weeks ago, Marcus's life had completely imploded. His tech startup had gone under, taking his life savings with it, and his wife had filed for divorce in the exact same week. He was a ghost of himself, drowning in debt and despair. When he called me from a motel parking lot, choking back tears, I didn't even hesitate. I told him to pack a bag and come stay with us. Chloe had been hesitant at first, pointing out that having a third person in our space might disrupt our routine, but I had pleaded his case. He's my brother, I told her. He would do the same for me. Eventually, she relented, showing the grace that I loved her for. Marcus had been sleeping on our large sectional sofa in the living room for 20 days, keeping to himself, job hunting during the day, and keeping his mess contained to his designated corner. But as I stepped into the foyer that night, the living room couch was completely empty. The rumpled gray blanket I had bought him was folded neatly at the edge, and his laptop was closed on the coffee table. A half-empty glass of bourbon sat next to it, condensation leaving a ring on the dark wood. I figured he was probably upstairs in the guest room, or maybe he'd gone out to a local bar to clear his head. I set my suitcase down quietly by the stairs, careful not to let the wheels squeak on the hardwood floor. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, my boots making faint thuds. That's when I noticed Chloe's phone sitting face down on the granite island. It was blinking with missed notifications. Chloe never left her phone downstairs, especially not overnight. She was practically glued to it for her interior design business. A strange, cold prickle of unease washed over me, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just exhausted too. Maybe it had been a long day. I took off my boots, leaving them by the mudroom door, and began a quiet walk up the carpeted stairs. The house was pitch black now, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the hallway window. As I reached the top landing, I instinctively turned left toward our master bedroom. The door was cracked open just an inch, a thin sliver of yellow light spilling out into the dark hallway. That was odd. Chloe could never sleep with any light on. She needed absolute darkness, often using a silk eye mask. I reached out, my hand hovering over the cold brass doorknob. My heart, for reasons I couldn't yet explain, began to beat a little faster. It was that primal, evolutionary instinct telling you that something is fundamentally wrong before your brain can actually process the data. I pushed the door open, the hinges giving an incredibly faint, almost imperceptible creak. The lamp on Chloe's nightstand was turned down to its lowest dimmer setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and for a second, my brain simply refused to understand what it was looking at. The human mind is funny like that. It will try to protect you from a traumatic truth by making up excuses. I thought I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. I thought I was dreaming. Chloe was in our bed, buried beneath the heavy white duvet. But she wasn't alone. There was a man lying next to her, his back to the door, one long, muscular arm draped possessively over her waist. His dark hair was messy, buried into the pillow that I usually slept on. Chloe's head was resting on his shoulder, her breathing slow and rhythmic. She looked completely peaceful, completely safe. I stood frozen in the doorway, the air evaporating from my lungs. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of their synchronized breathing. I stared at the man's shoulder blade, at a very specific, jagging white scar just below his left shoulder, a scar he got when we threw ourselves out of a moving pickup truck during a reckless college camping trip in the Hocking Hills. It was Marcus, my best friend, my brother, the man I had fed, clothed, and sheltered when he had absolutely nothing left. He was in my house, in my bed, holding my wife. The betrayal didn't hit me as a wave of anger. It hit me as a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of me so violently I had to grab the door frame to keep my knees from buckling. The room began to spin, the yellow light stretching into sickening streaks. A million memories flashed through my mind in a fraction of a second. Marcus giving a toast at our wedding, laughing as he called Chloe the best thing that ever happened to me. Chloe complaining just last week about how untidy Marcus was, her voice filled with a faux annoyance that I now realized was a brilliant, calculated performance, designed to keep me from ever suspecting a thing. How long? That was the first question that screamed through the void in my mind. How long had this been going on? Was it just since he moved in? Or had I been the blind, hard-working fool for years, flying across the country to provide a comfortable life for a woman who was waiting for me to leave so she could welcome my best friend into our bed? I wanted to scream. I wanted to lung across the room, tear Marcus out of that bed, and use my bare hands to destroy everything he had left. The rage was a white-hot iron in my throat, choking me. But louder than the rage was a profound, suffocating sense of humiliation. I looked at them, and I felt so incredibly small. I felt like a stranger trespassing in my own life. I didn't wake them up. I don't know what kind of strength it took or what kind of survival mechanism kicked in, but I gently pulled the door shut until it clicked. I turned around, walked down the stairs with steps that felt like lead, grabbed my suitcase, and walked right out the front door. I didn't even take the roses from the truck. I just got in, started the engine, and drove into the dark Texas night, my mind completely blank and my life completely shattered. I drove for 3 hours without a destination, the highway lines blurring into a hypnotic, endless white streak beneath my headlights. The digital clock on the dashboard read 3:45 a.m. when I finally pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner off Interstate 35. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pink glow over the hood of my truck. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and grease, a harsh contrast to the suffocating sweetness of the life I had just left behind. I sat in a vinyl booth, staring at a cup of black coffee I didn't touch, my hands shaking so violently that the ceramic rattled against the saucer. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, calculating numbness. Every interaction I had witnessed between Chloe and Marcus over the past 3 weeks began to replay in my mind, but this time, the filter of trust was gone. I remembered the way Chloe's laugh sounded just a little higher, a little more breathless when Marcus told a stupid joke at the dinner table. I remembered how she had suddenly started dressing up more, wearing makeup just to sit around the house on weekends, claiming she wanted to feel normal during the lockdown restrictions that had kept her isolated. I remembered the night I found them in the kitchen at midnight, laughing over a shared sleeve of Oreos. When I had walked in, they didn't jump or look guilty. They had just smiled and offered me one. They were so good at it. They had weaponized my own trust against me, using my love for them as a shield to hide their depravity. By 6 a.m., the sun was beginning to peek over the flat Texas horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. My phone, which had been silent all night, began to vibrate on the Formica table. Chloe's name flashed across the screen. My heart seized. I stared at the phone as it bounced against the table, the ringtone sounding like a mocking alarm. It cut out, then immediately started ringing again. This time, it was Marcus. The sheer audacity of it made me want to throw the phone through the window. They had probably woken up, realized my truck was gone, seen my suitcase missing from the entryway, and pieced together that the ghost had returned early. I didn't answer. I needed a plan. If I went back there hot-headed, screaming and throwing punches, I would lose. In the state of Texas, infidelity doesn't carry the legal weight it used to in divorce courts, unless you can prove asset depletion, that they spent marital funds on the affair. But more than the legal side, I wanted to understand the full scope of the betrayal before I tore their world apart. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to spend the day wondering exactly how much I knew, spinning in their own guilt and paranoia. I checked into a cheap, nondescript motel near the airport, a place where nobody asked questions and the carpets smelled faintly of old cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my laptop open on my knees, and logged into our shared cellular account. My fingers were cold as I navigated to the data and text logs. Because it was a family plan, I had access to the call history, though not the content of the texts. What I saw made the room tilt. Thousands of text messages. Hundreds of calls. The timestamps didn't just start 3 weeks ago when Marcus moved onto our couch. They went back 6 months. They went back to the winter, to the weeks when I was working 80-hour weeks to secure my promotion, flying to Chicago, New York, and Miami to keep our household afloat. While I was sitting in airports eating stale sandwiches, my wife was exchanging late-night messages with my best friend. The calls were often an hour long, placed during the exact times I was in the air, uncontactable. The devastation was total. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by Marcus's recent life crisis. It wasn't a drunken mistake on the couch. It was a prolonged, deeply embedded conspiracy. Marcus hadn't come to my house because he was homeless and desperate. He had used his divorce and financial ruin as the perfect Trojan horse to gain full-time access to my wife, right under my nose. And I had practically carried his bags into my own home. I had patted him on the back and told him to take all the time he needed. A heavy knock on my motel room door shattered the silence. My body went rigid. I hadn't given anyone my location, but my truck was parked right outside. I walked slowly to the door, peering through the peephole. It was Marcus. He looked disheveled, his t-shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. He must have used the location tracking app we shared as friends, a feature we had turned on years ago during a hiking trip and never deactivated. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Marcus took a step back, his hands raised in a defensive posture. His face was pale, devoid of the cocky, confident charm he usually carried. "Man, please, just let me talk," he stammered, his voice cracking. "It's not what it looks like. Let me explain." "Not what it looks like," I repeated, my voice terrifyingly calm, even to my own ears. All the screaming I thought I would do vanished. The anger had solidified into something heavy and dangerous. "I saw you in my bed, Marcus. I saw your arm around my wife. Which part of that did I misinterpret?" "We were drunk," he lied, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a desperate rush. "Chloe was crying about her mom, and I was messed up about the divorce, and we fell asleep. Nothing happened, I swear to God, bro. We just fell asleep talking. You have to believe me." I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man I had known for over a decade. I knew the cadence of his voice when he was lying. He always blinked too much and touched the back of his neck. He was doing both now. The realization that he was still trying to play me for a fool, still trying to protect his own skin at the expense of my sanity, broke the last remaining piece of my restraint. I didn't say a word. I stepped forward and drove my fist straight into his jaw. The impact sent a jolt of pain up my forearm, but the sound of his head hitting the cheap drywall of the motel exterior was deeply, profoundly satisfying. He collapsed onto the concrete walkway, clutching his face, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Get away from me," I whispered, standing over him as the motel manager peeked out from the front office window. "If I ever see your face again, Marcus, I won't stop. Tell Chloe she has until tonight to get her things out of my house. If she's still there when I get back, I'm throwing everything she owns into the driveway and burning it." Marcus didn't fight back. He just scrambled to his feet, wiping the blood on his sleeve, and ran toward his battered sedan. I watched him pull out of the parking lot, his tires screeching against the asphalt. I went back inside the room, shut the door, and locked it. My hand was throbbing, the knuckles split and bleeding, but I barely felt it. The confrontation hadn't brought the relief I thought it would. Instead, the reality of the situation was settling in like concrete. My marriage was dead. My longest friendship was dead. The life I had spent my entire 20s building was reduced to ashes in less than 12 hours. I sat down on the floor, leaning my back against the bed, and finally let the tears come. I cried for the man I used to be, the guy who trusted blindly, who thought that hard work and loyalty were enough to protect you from the dark things in this world. But as the afternoon sun began to fade, filling the motel room with long, grim shadows, the sadness began to morph into something else, something sharper. They thought they had ruined me, but they didn't know what I was truly capable of when everything was taken away. I didn't go back to the house that night. Instead, I stayed in that grim motel room, watching the minutes tick away on the digital alarm clock, letting the cold calculation entirely replace the grief. I knew Chloe. She was terrified of public embarrassment, obsessed with the polished image she presented to our country club friends, her clients, and her family. She wouldn't want a scene. By now, Marcus had undoubtedly crawled back to her, bleeding and terrified, to tell her that the game was entirely up. When my phone lit up at 8 p.m. with a text from her, I wasn't surprised. It read, "I'm at my sister's house in Round Rock. I took my clothes and the dog. Please don't do anything crazy. We need to talk like adults." Like adults. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She wanted to talk like adults after spending 6 months treating our marriage like a cheap high school drama. I didn't reply. I blocked her number, blocked Marcus's number, and immediately called a corporate divorce attorney whose name I had pulled from a colleague who went through a brutal split the year before. I retained him with a $5,000 deposit before the sun rose the next morning. Driving back into my neighborhood on Thursday afternoon felt like entering a ghost town. The suburban quiet, which had always felt peaceful, now felt eerie and mocking. I pulled into the driveway, half expecting to see her car, but the space was empty. The house was dead quiet when I walked inside. The air was still, carrying only the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the lingering odor of Marcus's bourbon. I walked up the stairs to our bedroom. It looked like a tornado had hit it. The closet doors were wide open, hangers clattering against each other in the draft. She had cleared out her designer bags, her shoes, and most of her clothes, leaving behind the empty boxes and the items she didn't care about. But as I looked closer at the vanity table in the corner, I noticed she had left something else behind. Her old iPad was sitting there, plugged into the wall charger. It was an older model she mostly used for reading recipes in the kitchen, but it was linked to her main Apple ID account. My heart did a familiar, painful thud against my ribs. I walked over, picked up the tablet, and pressed the home button. It required a passcode. I tried her birthday. Incorrect. I tried her anniversary date. Incorrect. Then, with a sickening knot forming in my stomach, I typed in Marcus's birthday. The screen clicked open instantly. I sat down on the edge of our unmade bed, the very bed where I had caught them, and opened the messaging app. Because the device was synced to her cloud account, every single message she had exchanged with Marcus over the past year was laid out right in front of me. It was a digital graveyard of my marriage. I spent the next 4 hours reading through the texts, sinking deeper into a circle of hell I didn't know existed. The messages weren't just physical or flirtatious. They were deeply emotional, cruel, and calculated. They talked about me as if I were an obstacle, an inconvenience that paid the mortgage. "He's flying to Denver next week," Chloe had texted back in January. "We have 3 whole days. Come over after he leaves for the airport." Marcus had replied, "I hate sharing you with him, even if it's just for show. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. He has no idea. He's too busy chasing his corporate titles to notice anything. There were photos, too. Photos taken in my kitchen, in my living room, on vacations that I had funded. While I was pulling 90-hour weeks, putting my health on the line to ensure we could buy a beach house in Florida, they were planning a future together, using my money. But the most devastating text came from just 2 days before Marcus moved into our house. The startup idea failed on purpose, Marcus had written to her. I liquidated the assets into a private account my wife doesn't know about. The divorce is moving fast. I told him I'm broke, so he'll let me stay on the couch. It's perfect. We'll be living together under his own roof, and he'll feel good about helping me. I stared at the screen, the breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just an affair of opportunity. Marcus hadn't lost his money. He hadn't been ruined. The entire thing was a beautifully orchestrated lie, designed to exploit my generosity, to get him into my house so they could carry on their affair without having to pay for hotels. They had turned me into the ultimate fool, a cuckold funding his own betrayal. The sadness completely evaporated then, burned away by a cold, black rage that filled my veins like liquid nitrogen. I didn't cry. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt an overwhelming, dark clarity. They wanted to play a game of chess with my life, believing I was just a mindless pawn. They thought I would just get a standard divorce, split the assets 50-50, cry into my pillow, and let them walk off into the sunset with half of everything I had worked for. They had no idea who I actually was when everything was stripped away. I didn't delete the messages. I used my phone to take photos of every single text thread, every image, every admission of financial fraud regarding Marcus's hidden tech startup funds. I compiled it all into a secure digital drive. Then I called my attorney back. "Michael," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "I just found something. A lot of things. I have proof of hidden assets, fraud, and a premeditated conspiracy to commit marital waste." There was a brief pause on the line before my lawyer spoke, his tone shifting from professional sympathy to intense focus. "Send me everything you have right now. If what you're saying is true, we aren't just going for a standard dissolution. We're going to take her to the cleaners." "I don't just want a divorce, Michael," I said, staring out the window at the beautiful, empty suburban street. "I want to destroy them. I want Marcus's ex-wife to know about his hidden accounts. I want Chloe's clients to know who she really is. I want them to have absolutely nothing left when I'm done." "Let's get to work," he replied. I hung up the phone and walked downstairs to the living room. I looked at the couch where Marcus had slept, at the kitchen island where Chloe had left her phone. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a crime scene. But for the first time in 48 hours, I didn't feel like the victim. I felt like the executioner. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began the meticulous process of auditing every single bank statement, credit card bill, and wire transfer from the past 2 years. If they wanted to play dirty in my house, I was going to make sure they burned in it. The legal war that followed over the next 6 months was not a loud, dramatic clash, but a quiet, surgical dismantling of their lives. With the digital drive of evidence in my attorney's hands, the leverage shifted entirely. Texas may be a no-fault divorce state, but judges look incredibly unfavorably upon a spouse who uses marital funds to facilitate a long-term affair, let alone a co-conspirator who commits fraud. Michael filed the paperwork with a level of aggression that caught Chloe's high-priced attorney completely off guard. The first domino to fall was Marcus's hidden safety net. Michael immediately subpoenaed the financial records of Marcus's defunct tech startup, looping in the forensic accountants from his ex-wife's legal team. When Marcus's ex-wife found out he had hidden over $300,000 in a private offshore account while claiming bankruptcy, her lawyers descended on him like vultures. Within 2 weeks, his assets were entirely frozen, and he was facing serious federal allegations of bankruptcy fraud. The man who had mocked me for being a blind, hard-working corporate drone was suddenly looking at potential prison time and total financial ruin. Chloe didn't fare any better. When she realized I had the iPad messages, that I knew every single detail of her cruelty, her planning, and her mockery, her polished country club composure completely shattered. She tried to schedule meetings, sent frantic emails pleading for a private mediation, and even had her mother call me to beg for mercy. I ignored every single attempt at contact. Everything went through Michael. We offered her a settlement that was intentionally brutal, but legal enough to ensure a judge would sign off on it without a lengthy trial. In exchange for me not releasing the text logs and explicit photos to her high-end interior design clients and family members, she had to sign over her entire equity in our Austin home, waive any right to my corporate retirement accounts, and walk away without a single dime of spousal support. Her attorney told her to fight it, but the fear of public exposure and professional ruin paralyzed her. She signed the papers in a bleak conference room downtown on a rainy Tuesday morning. I didn't even look at her when she put the pen to the paper. The day after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the empty living room of our colonial house. The furniture was gone, sold off or given away, leaving only the dark hardwood floors and the white walls. The house didn't smell like her perfume or Marcus's bourbon anymore. It just smelled like clean paint and empty space. I had put the property on the market, and it had sold in less than 48 hours for well over the asking price. I was leaving Austin, taking a corporate transfer to a new VP position in San Diego. Before I loaded the last box into my truck, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email from a burner account, but the writing style was unmistakably Chloe's. "I hope you're happy," the message read. "Marcus and I are over." He lost everything in his divorce settlement. His reputation is ruined, and he's moving back to Ohio to live with his parents. My business is failing because people are talking anyway. You destroyed us. We made a mistake, but we were in love. You didn't have to be this cruel. I read the email twice, standing there in the pale afternoon light of the empty house. A year ago, a message like that would have broken my heart. It would have made me question myself, filled me with guilt and doubt. But looking at it now, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hatred, not even a sense of victory. Just a profound, liberating emptiness. They thought they had broken me by exposing how fragile trust could be, but they had actually done me a favor. They had cured me of my naivete. They had taught me that the people closest to you can carry the sharpest knives, and that survival means being willing to build a fortress around your own life. I didn't reply to the email. I deleted it, turned off the phone, and walked out the front door for the last time. I locked the deadbolt, slipped the key under the welcome mat for the new owners, and walked down the driveway to my truck. As I pulled out of the cul-de-sac and accelerated toward the highway, the Texas sun was setting in my rearview mirror, burning bright and furious, clearing the way for a completely clean slate.